We're studying a machlokes about how to count the mitzvos of Talmud Torah. The Rambam's opinion is that there's only one mitzvah of Talmud Torah, and that's Lilmod Torah. However, Rav Saadia Gaon counts two different mitzvahs. One mitzvah Lilmod Torah and one mitzvah Lelamed Torah. And we're trying to analyze the fundamental difference here between these two countings. We thought that they were just an abstract machlokes, a controversy that you could call up in the air without any halachic significance or repercussions or Nafka Minos. But the Masais Moshe, whose name was Rav Shimon Diskin, he died about 25 years ago. He was a Rosh Yeshiva in a yeshiva called Kol Torah. Not Lev Torah, but Kol Torah. And that yeshiva was in Beit Vagan. He himself was born in Poland back in the 30s, studied in Eretz Yisrael in a yeshiva called Panovich, have you ever heard of it? And he wrote extensively. One of his writings is on the Rambam. And in Hilchas Talmud Torah, he claims that there are no less than 3 Nafka Minos, halacha l'maaseh, between the Rambam on the one hand and Rav Saadia Gaon on the other hand. Between the Rambam Shita, that we count Talmud Torah as one mitzvah Lilmod Torah, and Rav Saadia Gaon, who has the mitzvah of Lilmod Torah and the mitzvah of Lelamed Torah. 3 Nafka Minos. And our goal for tonight is to, at the very least, in the time that we have, to go through these 3 Nafka Minos one after the other and see if we can come to some conclusion as to how these 3 Nafka Minos evolve from this controversy between the Rambam on the one hand and Rav Saadia Gaon on the other hand. So I'm going to stop in just a few minutes after presenting the first Nafka Mina, one that we've already studied in the past, but every time I come back to it, I come back with a new fresh start and a new insight and perhaps new excitement. And I feel I'm getting closer and closer to getting a grasp on what I believe Rav Diskin is trying to teach us here about this machlok. So the first Nafka Mina is based on the Minchas Chinuch, who claims, and this is his original thought, that in the mitzvah of Milah, which the Gemara in Kiddushin Chavtes establishes is a chiyuv on the father, and it's called Mitzvahs Ha'av al Haben, meaning the mitzvah that the ben has, which cannot be fulfilled by the ben, because obviously he can't accept any chiyuvim. He's an 8-day-old baby. That mitzvah milah now, by the Torah, was placed on the shoulders incumbent upon the father to do the milah. Says the Minchas Chinuch that as long as the katan is a katan, and he's not capable of receiving the chiyuv, because a katan is a lav bar chiyuva, then the father picks up the chiyuv. However, once the katan is nisgadel and he becomes a bar chiyuva, now he can receive and accept that chiyuv. And paka chiyuva da'av. Paka means we now terminate the obligation of the father. The father's obligation vis-a-vis his son's milah, therefore, is a temporary one that lasts for 13 years minus 8 days. But once that obligation is incumbent on the son himself, and that can only be possible when he becomes a bar mitzvah, bar chiyuva, then the father's chiyuv is gone, never to be recreated. And that's the Minchas Chinuch. What our question is, does the same structure, the same mechanics operate with regard to the mitzvah of Talmud Torah when the Torah says that the father is obligated to teach his son Torah? And a ben here in this context means what? A katan or gadol? A katan, correct? And now we could ask the following question, sort of like imagining what the Minchas Chinuch would say about this question if we can take the structure that he created in the Mitzvah Milah and clone it onto the structure of Talmud Torah in the case of the father's chiyuv vis-a-vis his son. Can we therefore postulate, based on the Minchas Chinuch, applying it to Talmud Torah, that the father's obligation vis-a-vis his son would terminate when the child becomes a gadol? Comes along the Masais Melech, and he claims that this depends upon the machlokes between the Rambam and Rav Saadia Gaon. And he develops this idea that whether or not the father's obligation vis-a-vis the Talmud Torah of his son will terminate when the son becomes a gadol would depend upon whether we count Talmud Torah as one mitzvah, Lilmod Torah, that's the Rambam Shita, or two mitzvahs, Lilmod Torah and Lilamed Torah. That's Rav Saadia Gaon Shita. Are there any questions up to this point? Harrison? You're okay. So let's go on then. We are trying to now unravel the mystery, or shall we say decode the codified words of the Masais HaMelech. Gentlemen, it doesn't look like we're all concentrating. Well, try to concentrate, because otherwise it's very hard for me to go on. So you'll be Mekayim two mitzvahs tonight. The mitzvah of Talmud Torah, hopefully, and the mitzvah of Bikur Cholim. And that mitzvah of Bikur Cholim will depend upon whether you raise my spirits. And to raise my spirits, I need your full cooperation, concentration, without any joking around. So the question is, are you willing to sign on and accomplish those two mitzvahs? The fact that you took your time and you came to join me tonight, I think speaks louder than words, and therefore you are ready, willing, and able to concentrate. Okay, then? And Isaac, I don't know if there's a way that you can turn your chair so that the back of your chair faces Gavriel and your beautiful face will face me. If there's, because I think, yeah, maybe you could somehow move it over a little bit, because then I could constantly see your face concentrating on every word of Torah here that's so important.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go on. According to Rav Saadia Gaon, the mitzvah incumbent upon a father to teach his son Torah is subsumed under the mitzvah of Lilamed Torah. It belongs to its own mitzvah. It's not part of the mitzvah to study Torah. Isaac, are we okay? Just tell me what, if I'm doing something wrong, or okay, tell me if my tie is not on right. I don't know, if you laugh, I don't know what you're laughing about, but it makes me very self-conscious.
I'm sorry, your tie.
Okay? No. Again, Torah should be exciting and happy, but there's also a point of time for everything. So now is the time for concentration and total focus. We're now studying the mitzvah of the father to teach his son Torah according to Rasag, under the mitzvah, the umbrella mitzvah of Lilamed Torah. Now, the mitzvah of Lilamed Torah, as a separate mitzvah, is an obligation that really is incumbent upon every Chacham b'Yisrael. And I think, Avril, you were quick to point this out yesterday. So the father's chiyuv vis-a-vis his son is just another expression, another branch of the general mitzvah to teach Torah. And the Masas HaMelech says the following, that the logic of the Minchas Chinuch applies specifically and exclusively when we deal with one single mitzvah, the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. Or, in the paradigmic case of the Minchas Chinuch, the mitzvah of Milah. There's one mitzvah of Milah. The question is, who's going to implement the mitzvah of Milah? Really, if all things were equal, at first glance, or shall we say, ideally, that mitzvah should be incumbent upon whom? Who needs the Milah? The son. But obviously that can't happen. So what did the Torah do? The Torah said that, you know what, we can't reach that great mitzvah of Milah the way we want it to be, because we need that the child be gemalt, that they be circumcised. So what we'll do is we'll shift the implementation of that mitzvah, the obligation to guarantee that the child who needs Milah will be in fact circumcised, we'll shift that obligation over to the father, but according to the Minchas Chinuch, only on a temporary basis. Meaning until what time? Until such time that the child could step up to the plate and receive the chiyuv ha-mitzvah. Once the child becomes a gadol, then that mitzvah milah goes back to its original, perfect, ideal, pristine system in which the child himself, who needs milah, the whole mitzvah milah on the father, starts with the ben. It bounces from the ben onto the father. Not so in the case of Talmud Torah, according to the Rasag. Because according to the Rasag in Talmud Torah, where does the mitzvah begin? With the father. Why does the mitzvah begin with the father? Because the mitzvah is lalamed Torah. So if you could imagine, here's the object and here's the subject. What happens here now? It's just, I can't, I don't know. So in the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, we can go in two directions. We could start with the son, like we did in the case of Milah, and we could fling the chiyuv or transmit the chiyuv over to the father. Or we could say, no, the chiyuv begins with the father. And we're saying now that according to Rav Saadia Gaon, the chiyuv begins with the father in the case of Talmud Torah. It's not like the case of Milah, where the Torah was just looking for a way in which that mitzvah of Milah, which is really the child's mitzvah, can be fulfilled. In the case of Talmud Torah, once we introduce a new category, a new mitzvah called Lilamed Torah, then the child is just one of many, many, many possibilities for a person to fulfill the mitzvah of Lilamed Torah. In the case of a chacham, he fulfills the mitzvah of Lilamed Torah vis-a-vis your son or my son. It doesn't have to be his son. In the case of his son, there's a special chiyuv. And the chiddush is that even though the child is a katan, nevertheless the father's chiyuv of Lamed Torah extends and embraces even a katan. But kol shkein a gadol. And if you need a proof in the pudding, it's the fact that the mitzvah of Lamed Torah applies even to ben chavera. So it's not limited to beno. And therefore it has nothing to do really with the fact that the ben is a katan and the father is ki'ilu filling in on a temporary basis to fulfill the chiyuv that really belongs to the katan. That's not so. The mitzvah is Lamed Torah. And therefore, the first Nafka Minos is going to be that according to the Rasag, the father's chiyuv vis-a-vis his son will continue past the child's katnus, even when he's a gadol, because he's no different than any other child. Even if he's not my son, I'm obligated to teach him Torah. And certainly when he's a gadol. So there's no logical justification, according to Rav Saadia Gaon, to apply the structure of the Minchas Chinuch of Milah, namely that the chiyuv of the av is paka when the child becomes a katan, to the case of Talmud Torah. Because again, as I emphasized, in the case of Talmud Torah, the mitzvah begins as an obligation incumbent upon the father. And in truth, that obligation is not just limited to the son. He's chayav to teach Torah to whoever needs Torah. But now we have a mitzvah l'lamed Torah. The child's mitzvah is lilmod Torah. Again, he can't pick up that chiyuv now. But now the Torah says, and it's a big chiddush, the father has his chiyuv of l'lamed Torah, even though the child is a katan. That mitzvah, as a separate independent mitzvah of Talmud Torah, it's not part of Talmud Torah, it's a new mitzvah called l'lamed Torah. That mitzvah does not terminate, but continues during the course of the lifetime of the son. But not so according to the Rambam. The Rambam holds that there's only one mitzvah, which is called lilmod Torah. The problem with lilmod Torah in the case of a katan is that he's not capable of receiving such a chiyuv. What does that remind you of, those words? When I say that the problem of Talmud Torah, the son, is that he's not capable of receiving that chiyuv. What does that remind you of? What?
No.
I can't hear you.
Mila.
They said Mila.
Excellent, Mila. Great. You've justified this entire enterprise. This is going to be, according to the Rambam, identical with the mitzvah of Mila. We're in the framework of the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, which is to study Torah. The child is not capable of studying Torah. The Torah desperately needs that the child receive Torah, but he can't receive the chiyuv of Talmud Torah. So on a temporary basis, we're going to ask the father to step up to the plate and feed his son Torah, because right now his son is incapable of accepting that chiyuv. This, my friends, is the first Nafka Minos of three between Rav Saadia Gaon and the Rambam. And I will stop now for questions or comments, and if not, we go on to the second Nafka Minos.
So wait, bro. So means
Now, I know, Gavriel, you're about to say something. I may need your help and everybody's help to understand, because of the difficulty with the camera, but try to see if you can speak slowly, clearly, and hopefully I'll be able to hear you.
so the father, even before the son is born, has the chiyuv to teach anybody, right?
There may be other people on the face of the planet that have to be taught. Yeah, so he has a chiyuv to teach.
Yeah, so meaning the only thing that once he has a son is that his, as the Rambam would say, his son is cut into and is before everyone else.
I didn't hear those words, cut something, cut edge or something.
The son will be before everyone else, take precedence.
There's
to
a lot
everyone.
of echo. Harrison, maybe you could help me out over here?
The son would take precedence to everyone else, right?
But the son is coded. He has precedence. The only thing that changes when the son is born is that now
Right, this one takes precedence.
he's top on the list of who the father needs to teach.
Correct. If there's a set of who comes first in terms of the father's implementing his chiyuv to teach Torah, the son will come before everyone else. So my son comes first before your son. But both my son and your son come under the same mitzvah, the same rubric, which is called L'Lamed Torah, a separate mitzvah of L'Lamed Torah. And when the mitzvah is L'Lamed Torah, the mitzvah begins not with the son, but it begins with the father, meaning he, as a teacher of Torah, is obligated to teach Torah, and that has nothing to do with the Minchas Chinuch. Because the Minchas Chinuch is not talking about a father who has a chiyuv of Milah. The father's chiyuv of Milah is really a borrowed, on-deck circle chiyuv. Do you follow what I mean by on-deck circle? Meaning the father is stepping up where the katan can't fulfill his chiyuv.
Practicality.
Like what?
Practicality.
Can't hear you, sorry.
It's practicality.
Practicality. Okay. But again, when you say practicality, I get a little bit nervous. There's a conceptual breakthrough over here. What we're saying is that the chiyuv itself, inherently, in Milah, and probably in Talmud Torah, if you define Talmud Torah as Lilmod Torah, the way the Rambam defines it, the inherent chiyuv is on the child himself. But of course, and here's where you could use the word practicality, he cannot receive the chiyuv. He's legally not able to receive that chiyuv. He's not a bar chiyuva. So we have a temporary problem. That problem with the passage of time will be resolved. If he's not a bar chiyuva today, he'll be a bar chiyuva 13 years later. And then he'll surely be ready to fulfill the chiyuv of Talmud Torah, and in the case of Milah, the chiyuv of Milah. So therefore, the father is relieved of his responsibility at the point at which the child becomes a gadol. All that makes sense according to the Rambam, who has one single mitzvah of Talmud Torah, the study of Torah, which parallels the one single mitzvah of Milah. And yesterday we used the term bounce back and forth, if you remember. So therefore, we're going to apply the Minchas Chinuch, according to the Rambam, to the case of Talmud Torah Debanim, of the father to the son. But if I go to Rasag, and the Rasag starts the chiyuv with the father in the case of Talmud Torah, why? Because the chiyuv of the father to teach the son is part and parcel of a greater matrix of the chiyuv of L'Lamed Torah. L'Lamed Torah means you have to teach Torah. And Adrab, we're not saying you have to teach Torah because the son is a katan. We're saying you have to teach Torah despite the fact that the son is a katan. Do you hear the difference? One way of saying it, oh, you know what? The child is never a katan. Let the father pick it up. The other way is to say it, the father's a chiyuv, and you would have thought the father does not have a chiyuv vis-a-vis a katan. He's too young. No, the father's chiyuv is even vis-a-vis the katan. But that chiyuv remains in place even after the katan becomes a gadol, because that chiyuv is not a result of his being a katan. In the case of Milah, why is the father chayiv? It's because of the fact that the child is a katan. Not so in the case of Talmud Torah, according to Rasag. The reason why the chayiv is chayiv in Torah is not because of the child being a katan, but despite the fact that the child is a katan, and it's because of the father's personal chiyuv L'lamed Torah. Ad kana kofa aleph. Can we go on to the second Nafka Minos with your permission? Okay. We are now going to discuss the mitzvah pidyon haben. The Gemara asks the following question in Kiddushin Daf Chaf Tes Amud Aleph. What happens if the father has not been poda himself, and yet he has to be poda his son? He has now a double whammy, a double chiyuv. The child's grandfather, unfortunately, was not poda the child's father. Are we okay?
Yeah, I got a call, but I had to.
Oh. Okay. So what do you do in that case, the Gemara wants to say? Let's say the father now has a double chiyuv. What is his double chiyuv? Number one, he has to be poda himself. Number two, he has to be poda his son. So the Gemara says, okay, that's not a big deal. I'll read the Gemara to you. The Gemara says, Panarabanan hu liftos hu b'no liftos, hu kodem libno. Rabbi Yehuda omer b'no kodem lo. Fine, so that brisa has to be understood, machlokes, who comes first. However, the Gemara on Chaf Tes Amud Beis says the following. What happens if the father only has total assets of 5 sloim? So it's not just a question of who comes first, which is a debate between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda, but rather kol heicha delek el chamish sloim. What's going to be in this case? And the Gemara submits that in this case, even Rabbi Yehuda would admit, and it's universally accepted, Hakol modim, that hu kodem libno, that he should take the 5 slime that he has and use it to be poda himself at the expense of not being able to be poda his son. So again, if it's a question which comes first, then you have the Tanakam who says the father comes first, and then afterwards he'll poda his son. And Rabbi Yehuda has the opposite. First he should poda his son and then poda himself. He's got 10 slime. But what happens, asks the Gemara, if he only has a total of 5 slime? Here, even Rabbi Yehuda, everybody agrees that he will use the 5 slime to be poda himself at the expense of forfeiting the mitzvah of being poda his son. My timer. Mitzvah de gufe adifa. Now, mitzvah de gufe adifa literally translates as a mitzvah that you fulfill with your guf is greater than a mitzvah that you fulfill with another's guf. Meaning that the obligation of the father, since his father was not poda him, is called mitzvah de gufe. It's a mitzvah vis-a-vis his own guf. And that takes precedence and even will deflect the mitzvah that's not a mitzvah de gufe, but rather a mitzvah for the son's pidyon. How do we understand this Gemara? Comes along the Masai HaMelech, and he suggests the following. This principle of the Gemara is based on one fundamental premise. And if that premise changes, then we don't apply this principle. What is that premise? The premise is that we're dealing with one mitzvah. Make a note of that. We're dealing with one mitzvah. We have 5 sloim, and we have a mitzvah pidyon haben. The problem is that one mitzvah is generated twice by 2 different bodies, so to speak. The Father and the Son. When you have one mitzvah, and that mitzvah might be caught up in a tug of war, because the mitzvah pidyon haben now expresses itself in the father's chiyuv to be pod himself, and in the father's chiyuv to be pod his son. And now you have a struggle that's written inside the mitzvah itself. Within the mitzvah itself, the halachic principle that operates here is mitzvah de gufei adifa. The mitzvah that you have vis-a-vis yourself will trump the mitzvah that you have vis-a-vis your son. But by Medvar Mamurim, this is all because it's one single mitzvah. Says the Masas HaMelech, what would be in a parallel situation in Talmud Torah? The father could either teach himself or he could teach his son. If the father is in Baltimore, the son is in New York, then it's impossible for him to teach himself and his son. He's got to make a choice of one over the two. Whether or not we apply the principle of mitzvah de gufei adif to knock off the chiyuv of Talmud Torah of the son in favor of the chiyuv gufei of the father vis-a-vis his own body, that will depend on the machlokas between Rav Saadia Gaon and the Rambam. Because according to Rav Saadia Gaon, when we talk about the father's chiyuv to teach his son and the son's chiyuv of Talmud Torah, we're talking about 2 different mitzvahs. The mitzvah of the son fits under the category of Talmud Torah, of Lilmod Torah. The mitzvah of the father fits under a different mitzvah entirely, and that's Lil Lamed Torah. In such a case, we cannot apply the klal of mitzvah de gufei adif, because we cannot make one mitzvah superior to a second mitzvah. Each mitzvah vies and struggles and pulls in its direction. And therefore, we don't have the ability, the authority, the legal halachic authority to choose one mitzvah over the other. We can't give grades to mitzvahs. We don't know which mitzvah is greater than the other. What should I say? It reminds me by sheer association, my chaz is the damach didach. How are you going to choose to save this guy's life and take this guy's life? They're 2 mitzvahs, each standing strong, firmly demanding its kiyum. When do we apply mitzvah de gufei adif? When the mitzvah itself splits into 2, and now we have to figure out which of the 2 is going to take precedence. Then we have mitzvah de gufei adif, but if you have 2 separate mitzvahs, then who gives you the right to choose one mitzvah over the other? Masha'ein came according to the Rambam that there's only one mitzvah of Talmud Torah. Call it the Torah of the Father, the Torah of the Son, it's all one mitzvah. Well, now the Torah has to address the following situation. Within the various permutations of that one single mitzvah, we have to have a decision in the struggle and the tug of war between the father's Talmud Torah and the son's Talmud Torah. It's all one mitzvah. But we have now an inherent stira, so to speak, almost a contradiction within that one mitzvah. Well, if it's within one mitzvah, then according to the Rambam, We're going to apply the principle of mitzvah de gufei adifa. And the father will have the obligation to study Torah in New York rather than travel to Baltimore and have to teach his son Torah. The problem is that a few lines later in this Gemara in Kiddushin Daf Chav Tes Amid Beis, the Gemara says the following: Tana Rabbanon, it's the third line of the wide lines. Hu lilmod ubeno lilmod. What do we do in a case where he has to learn Torah, the father, ubeno lilmod, but his son has to learn Torah? Who should go first? Well, what would be your answer to that question? If the Rambam was here, what would he say, Isaac?
I'm not sure what the Rambam would say, but dear God told me to tell you he got on the wrong bus. That's why he's not here.
Somebody's on a bus, you said?
A deer isn't here because he took the wrong bus.
Okay, somebody took the wrong bus. I didn't catch the name.
A deer.
Adir took the wrong bus. Gus.
Yeah.
And you expect me to believe that story. Okay, good. I'm very
He
naive.
told me that. He told me he'd actually stranguled.
All right. But again, I'm trying, Isaac, to see if you can give me the right answer to my question. Right now, I wasn't asking about Adir's absence. I want to know if you could tell me, according to the Rambam, that there's one single mitzvah of Talmud Torah that encompasses both the father's study of Torah and the son's study of Torah. Who should come first? And there should be a clear-cut answer to that question.
The father.
Why?
Because it's his gift.
Because of mitzvah de gufei adif.
Yeah.
Because mitzvah de gufei adif is the overriding principle whenever you have a struggle within one single mitzvah. Because by definition, the mitzvah itself, since it splits in a way that would cause that friction, that tension, has to come up with a gradation to set up which grade each obligation achieves. And here we have a principle that the obligation vis-a-vis my own guf is on a higher grade, it's upgraded vis-a-vis my chiyuv towards your guf. In this case, towards the Ben's guf. But guess what? It's not what the Gemara says. The Gemara tells us that we're going to give the son a test. We're going to send him to some sort of rabbinic advisory board, and we're going to try to determine what is the capacity of the son in Torah terms. Not his IQ, but his TQ. If, the Gemara says, he is Zariz, meaning he's very dedicated to his Torah. Number two, he's Mamulach. He's very sharp. He comes up with new analyses and insights. V'talmudo miskayim b'yado, and he remembers his Torah, then hu kodem la'am. And the Rambam in Perek Aleph Milchas Talmud Torah paskins exactly this way. I'll read to you the Rambam. The Rambam says, Hayahu lilmod Torah, v'yesh lo ben lilmod Torah, im haya beno navon umaskil beno kodem. What do you mean beno kodem? The Gemara says, with regard to Pidyon Ben, that mitzvah de gufei adif. This halacha makes sense according to Rav Saadia Gaon. Why? Because according to Rav Saji Gaon, we cannot apply the principle of mitzvah de gufei adif. Because when you have two separate mitzvahs, the study of Torah of the son and the obligation to teach Torah incumbent on the father as a separate mitzvah l'lamed Torah based on the rasag, then you cannot set up gradations between two separate mitzvahs. You can only set up gradations within one mitzvah itself. And now we end up with a beautiful raya, a proof text to support Rav Saji Gaon that we're dealing with two separate mitzvahs. This is not the case of Pidyon Haben. In Pidyon Haben, mitzvah de gufei adif, because when the Torah has one mitzvah that splits into two, and there is a conflict, vying each one against the other, then we apply the gradation principle of mitzvah de gufei adif. But we cannot apply that principle to two separate independent mitzvahs, like the case of the son's Talmud Torah, which is the mitzvah of Lilmod, and the father's chiyuv vis-a-vis his son, which is the mitzvah l'lamed. And therefore, the Gemara had no choice but to come up with a different system in order to solve the problem of these two mitzvahs that are vying for each other. The mitzvah of Lilmod Torah and the mitzvah of l'lamed Torah. The father's mitzvah of Lilmod Torah, maybe I didn't say it that way before, that's what I meant to say, and the father's mitzvah l'lamed Torah. And the Gemara says we're going to max it out. We're going to see where we can achieve the maximum of the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. And that's a brand new modus operandi, a way of determining with a new klal who comes first, the father or the son. And as it turns out, it might very well be that the son will come first by maximizing the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. But according to the Rambam, since we're within the framework of one single mitzvah of Talmud Torah, then the principle that should ride freely here, that should overpower everything, is mitzvah de gufei adif. Why did the Gemara offer an alternative, the opposite solution, that maybe the son should come first? That's hakafa number 2. Do we have any questions before we go on to the third Nafka Minos?
So I have a question on the second Nafka Minos, why you couldn't say that the father goes first to the son in the Bahal? Because couldn't the father go around himself? And then, right, you see it in this Torah as well, right?
Harrison,
Yeah.
can you second what Gabriel is saying?
So I don't understand why you couldn't say that the father would also go first according to the Rasag and the Bahal.
The father
Because,
should go first?
yeah,
Yeah, for sure the father should go first. But why should the father go first?
no, according to,
It's two different mitzvahs. It's the father's Talmud Torah versus the father's l'lamed Torah. How are you going to choose between those two mitzvahs? You cannot apply the principle of mitzvah de gufei adif in two separate mitzvahs. But what you can apply is, when you have two separate mitzvahs, which mitzvah will be more perfect? Which kiyum will be maximized? And for that, we need to evaluate the father versus the son. So let's say, for example, you were going to yeshiva called Or Chaim, right? And
Yeah.
let's say they were giving out scholarships. And there are two students vying for a scholarship. How can you choose one student over the other? The answer is, where will we maximize the achievement of knowledge, of scholarship? And therefore, each one will take a test. You know, in England, it's called the A levels and the O levels. In New York, it's called the regions. Every state and every province has its own way of evaluating. We have also, have you ever heard of SATs? I don't think they have that in Canada.
Yeah, like they take them like if you want to.
All right. So I don't know what the Canadian equivalent of SATs, but let's say a Canadian student wants to prove his superiority over another Canadian student, and he challenges the other Canadian. Let's take the SATs. Let's say who does better on the SATs. And one student came out with a 1400, and the other student came out with an 1100. Again, the one student who was better at he came from Quebec, so he was better at French. He did better on the French exam. And the Torontonian did better on the English exam. So then it's very complicated. We don't know who really is the final winner. But you get the point. You want to maximize I'm giving the scholarship money. I want to see results. So that's called Beno Memulach, Zoriz, V'Talmura Miskayim B'Yado. That's the only method, according to Rav Saadia Gaon, that can allow you to determine where the father's obligation should fall and where he should give precedence. But the principle of mitzvah de gufei adif could not apply, because that only applies when you're dealing with one single mitzvah. But according to the Rambam, we don't even understand how the Gemara could come to the conclusion that maybe the ben will come first. What about the principle of mitzvah de gufei adif? To the same extent that in Pidyon HaBen, we applied the principle of mitzvah gufei adif in the two scenarios of that single mitzvah of Pidyon HaBen. Here also, according to the Rambam in Talmud Torah, we have two different scenarios of the one single mitzvah of Talmud Torah, of Lilmod Torah. So we should therefore gradate the mitzvahs. When I say the mitzvahs, I mean the application or the scenarios of the mitzvahs, and say that in gradation, mitzvah de gufei adif. And that should be the conclusion according to the Rambam. We're stuck with this problem on the Rambam. Who asked this kasha? The Masai Samela. Beautiful kasha. And in the third paragraph here, which you'll have on page Tzadi Aleph, he attacks that issue and tries to defend the Rambam. And what does he say? He says, Elenira desfirle, it seems that the Rambam holds, this is about 7 lines down, da kol michelke ha-mitzvah Talmud Torah, kol nichal b'limud Torah dideh, be'ma shalomed li'atzmo, be'ma shemolamed libno. The Rambam holds that once we have one single mitzvah of Talmud Torah, then we combine all of them and integrate all of them, shava b'shava, into one equal entity. And when the father is teaching his son Torah, he's basically learning Torah for himself, because there's no difference between learning Torah and teaching Torah. It's all part of one indivisible, identical mitzvah. So if we identify the mitzvah of the father's learning with the mitzvah of the father's teaching his son, and it's all one shava b'shava, then we cannot apply the principle of mitzvah de gufei adif. And therefore the Rambam likewise will have to fall into place, and the only way we can be machriya and decide this issue is by maximizing the kiyum of Talmud Torah. In the case the son is zariz, etc., that will be the maximization of Talmud Torah. And now we get up to Hakafa Gimel, the third Nafka Minos, but I think it's time for you guys to go daven Ma'ariv. Is that so?
I don't know what time it is.
So I'm just pointing out, I'm willing to go for another 10, 15 minutes, but according to my clock, it's already past 10 to 10.
It's 9:51 already.
Yeah, Ma'ariv is also 9:50.
Okay, just 1 second.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Just give me a second here. I'm trying